Part 3, test review, accelerated geometry, advanced algebra. Solve each equation by factoring. So we're on number 9, and 9 says n squared plus 8n equals 0. Remember always to check for a greatest common factor. Remember, a greatest common factor can be a variable. In this case, it's going to be n. So we factor out n, and we're left with n plus 8 equals 0. We have to take each factor. This is one factor, this is the second factor. Each one we set equal to 0 and solve for n. The reason why we set each factor equal to 0 is because in order to get 0 here, one of these two has to be 0. Anything multiplied 0 will give us a 0. So we have to find out how to make one of these two 0. If you remember that, it'll help you remember what to do to solve for these. So this one's already done, but here I need to subtract 8. And I get n equals negative 8. So these are my solutions. Number 10. X squared minus 4x equals 5. This is not in standard form, and any kind of factoring we need to have in standard form at some point. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I will have x squared minus 4x minus 5 equals 0. I can do this with a t-chart. I know that the only factors I'm going to have for negative 5 are going to be negative 5 and 1 or negative 1 and 5. In order to get a negative 4, I'm going to have my 5 negative. So I know that I'm going to have x minus 5 times x plus 1. Again, if I just set them equal to 0, what's going to happen is the signs will change. So I'll have x equals 5 or x equal negative 1. And those will be my solutions. You can verify that if you need to by doing the same process we did here in number 9. 11. M squared minus 10 equals 3m. Again, it doesn't matter what I have on the other side. I need to get them all on one side and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 3m. And in standard form, I'll have m squared minus 3m minus 10 equals 0. We try a t-chart. We want a negative 10 and a negative 3. Remember, I need to multiply to get this. Add the same thing that I multiplied to get this. So, looks like negative 5 and 2 would work. If you don't recognize that, go ahead and just write down any factors you think of. Negative 5 plus 2 equals negative 3, so this is correct. And I'll have m minus 5 times m plus 2. And again, the signs just change when you solve it, as long as you have a 1 in front of your variable. Otherwise, you have to do a little more work. So these are my solutions. 12, p squared equals 1. This one we're just going to solve straightforward because we really don't have a whole lot here. I could just take the square root of both sides, and when I do that, I'll get p equals plus or minus 1. Remember, when you take the square root, you need to do both plus and minus. The next part says find all roots. It doesn't matter what the directions say. If it says solve, if it says find the roots, if it says find the zeros, you're doing the same process for every single one of those. So 13 x squared plus 4x plus 5 equals 0. If I try a t-chart, I have to multiply to get 5 and add that to get 4. 1 and 5 and -1 and -5 is the only thing that I could use to get a positive 5. But if I try to add this together, I'm going to get 6 here, and I'm going to get a -6 here. So this isn't going to work this time. So what I need to do then is go to the quadratic formula. So then I want to identify A, B, and C, and just put them into the quadratic formula. So I have -4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5 divided by 2 times 1. I'm going to get -4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 20 divided by 2. Bringing that down, I'm going to get -4 plus or minus the square root of -4 divided by 2. Remember, when we have a negative under the radical, we're dealing with an imaginary number. So I have to take that out as an I. So I have -4 plus or minus, and this is a perfect square, so I can take out a 2. So I'm going to have 2i divided by 2. Now here's where I see a lot of people making a mistake. Be very careful about this. This is really two fractions. So if I reduce here, I have to also reduce here or split them into separate fractions. Since everything's divisible by 2, I'm just going to go ahead and do it as 1. So -4 divided by 2 gives me -2. And then plus or minus, because I can't combine a real term and an imaginary term. But 2i divided by 2 is just going to leave me with I. So this is my two solutions. My next one is x squared plus 2x plus 2 equals 0, already in standard form for me. So let's see what I can do with this. I have a 2 and a 2, so that would be 1 and 2, so that would be 1 plus 2. So it looks like I'm going to have to go to the quadratic formula again. So a equals 1, b equals 2, and c equals 2. So I have -2 plus or minus square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2, all divided by 2 times 1. -2 plus or minus square root of 4 minus 8 divided by 2. So again, I'm going to end up with an imaginary number because I'm going to have a negative under the radical. -4. I can still take that whole thing out though. So I have a -2 plus or minus 2i all over 2, and I can reduce all my 2's. So I have -1 plus or minus I. be careful, because when you reduce a negative 2 over 2, it does not go away. You still have a term there. Number 15, x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. Do my t-chart, I have negative 4, negative 2, negative 2, positive 2, negative 2 plus 2 equals 0. Negative 4 times 1, negative 4 plus 1 equals negative 3. Looks like I'm going to the quadratic formula. A equals 1, B equals negative 2, C equals negative 4. So I have a negative 2, so I have a positive 2 then, plus or minus square root of negative 2 squared. Remember, you're squaring that whole thing, not just a 2, minus 4 times 1 times negative 4, all over 2a, 2 times 1, sorry. And that gives me 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 16, because I have a negative here and a negative here, so that'll give me positive, all over 2. So that gives me 2 plus or minus the square root of 20 over 2. And I can take out of the square root a 2, because I have 4 times 5, and this is a perfect square, comes out as 2. 5 will stay under the radical. 2 here. Again, I have 2, 2, and 2, so I'm going to reduce that to 1 plus or minus root 5. X squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. Let's try the t-chart. 12, negative 7. Since I want a negative middle term and a positive c, I'm going to need to use 2 negatives here. So if I take a negative 3 and a negative 4, that will give me my negative 7. So I have x minus 3 times x minus 4. Since I'm solving, this is equal to 0, I can switch the signs, and those will be my solutions. Remember, this is your factors. If you're factoring it, this is your answer. This is going to be your answer. But if you're solving, this will be your answer. So be sure that you read the question carefully.